As the summer of our foodie discontent continues apace, punctured by the deaths of Anthony Bourdain, then the great bard of L.A., Jonathan Gold, and most recently, France's genius of gastronomy, Joel Robuchon, the time is right to hang tight to our culinary idols. For me, that always began with Madhur Jaffrey. Madhur Jaffrey, photographed in 2017, first became famous as a cook in the 1960s in Britain, a culinary era so far removed from the present. Mani Karabel, Wire Image, often dubbed the Julia Child of Indian cookery, and credited for popularizing Indian ingredients in the West, she was at it long before turmeric lattes were all the rage, or curried cauliflower could be found on mainstream menus. The subcontinental icon turned 85 this week. She is still as engaged as ever. Jaffrey's last book in a catalogue of dozens, Vegetarian India, A Journey Through the Best of Indian Home Cooking, came out in 2015, but because she continues to make appearances, she is arguably a food world answer to Jane Fonda in the celebrity firmament, someone who has been influential in it since. Well, forever. Julia is long gone. So, for that matter, is Marcella Hazan, who did for Italian what Jaffrey did for Indian. Article continued. Below. Besides Jacques Pepin, the jolly PBS famous chef who will turn 83 in December, and the queen of organic, Alice Waters, 74, I can hardly think of someone else who is still alive, and continues to persist as a living totem of an eating culture that is entirely unrecognizable from today's, what with its conga line of celebrity brand chefs and Instagram-enabled vultures. Worlds apart from Jaffrey's ascent in the 1960s. By the time I got around to meeting Jaffrey for tea a few years back in Toronto, the legend appearing before me like a sparrow in a sari hair sat neatly, almost Indian-like. Her story had been told and retold, often by the cook herself. I was born in a sprawling house by the Yamuna River in Delhi. When I was a few minutes old, grandmother welcomed me into the world by writing Om, which means I am, in Sanskrit, on my tongue with a little finger dipped in honey. She wrote, a perfectly evoked meld of the earthy and the mystical, to kick off her 2006 memoir Climbing the Mango Trees. The main beats of her bio have also been additionally well polished. The scene shift from India, during the Raj, to England in 1955 when the young Madhur was accepted into the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. The gloom that then accompanied, when faced with the post-war rut in the British culinary scene, and whereupon her mother began sending her recipes in the mail, one by one, for simple dishes such as aloo jeera. A further move to New York City, and the climax of her actorly ambitions with the James Ivory Ismail merchant film Shakespeare Wale, for which she would be awarded Best Actress at the Berlin Film Festival. The happenstance encounter with a New York Times all-powerful food critic Craig Claiborne, who coughed off a profile of her as an actress who cooks, which then led to a book deal with legendary editor Judith Jones, the very book wizard behind Julia Child, which led to TV work, which led to more books, which led to, despite her many decades' reign as a kind of high princess of biryani, she was, like always, loath to use the C word when I interviewed her. I have never called myself a chef, rather, she likes to refer to herself, simply, as a home cook. It is something she has always pursued, while still dabbling in acting, appearing in everything from films like 6 Degrees of Separation to The Last Quartet. Indeed, if there is a unifying theory to the career of Madhur Jaffrey, it is that years before the culture would come to talk about the gig economy, she was always juggling fast. As she summed up the unifying theory of her career recently in a conversation with the Vice podcast Munchies, keeping going. Always. But also be able to turn on a dime. Article continued. Below. In the same interview, the spry octogenarian said that she had many other books on the brain, explaining, I can't sit around doing nothing. It isn't just her hustle that has long distinguished Jaffrey within the South Asian diaspora. Years before it would be normal to see a Priyanka Chopra leading an American TV series, or the likes of Kumail Nanjiani hosting SNL, she was one of the very few brown faces a brown kid like me saw on television. Like, at all. There was her BBC series, simply titled Madhur Jaffrey's Indian Cookery, plus 2 other series and, of course, a now famous appearance, in the 90s, on one of Julia Child's shows. watching an extra tall Julia coo and flutter, as Madhur regally goes through the instructions on making shrimp in spicy coconut sauce, as the coriander seeds hiss, and the fenugreek Greek pop is, thank you, YouTube, an adventure in odd couple gold. The Indian cook's legacy today? Patently obvious. It is there in the samosas you might find at your local grocer or neighborhood mixer, as well as in the influences felt in the herbs of other star chefs. It is there when Wolfgang Puck sings the praises of dal, or Daniel Boland pushes his quail with garam masala. In Britain, where Jaffrey's own culinary awakening began, the influence is even more substantial, with the late great critic A.A. Gill once outright declaring that curry is England's favourite dinner, and our national dish. In terms of her other calling, her legacy is sizable in other ways. She passed on her love of acting to her daughter, Sakina Jaffrey, who most memorably appeared as the chief of staff in those early seasons of House of Cards, playing a Latina. The more one talks to Jaffrey, the more it occurs that her two careers are intricately entwined. Though she made her fame by becoming a teacher of sorts, boasting the advantage of a palate that she compares to a skilled musician having an ear, it was the idea of entertaining and hosting that has always remained at her core. When you cook, especially for other people, it is not that different from performing. You have an audience, she told me, and it is an easy way to get applause. Shinan Gavana is a freelance columnist based in Toronto covering culture and society. Follow him on Twitter, @Shinangavani.